Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar on how to write an abstract. So we're going to talk through how to write an abstract. I'm John Dorling, I'm BAPM research lead and a neonatologist in Southampton. We've got Natalie Anders also taking part and she'll go through the BAPM guide to how to write an abstract. And then we have some team members from the BAPM office. So Marcus Hook and Jessica Smith are with us as well. So we're going to do much less than 10 minutes introduction, and then we're going to kick off with how to write an abstract. I'm then going to give you some examples of high quality abstracts from last year's conference, and then we're going to do a question and answer session. I should just point out that all of this is going to be recorded and will be available on the website, the BAPM website, as a resource for members to access after this session. So I'm going to pass over to Natalie, who's going to go through how to write an abstract. And as you can see there, this is available already on the BAPM website under resources, how to write an abstract. So over to Natalie.
Hi, I'm Natalie. I'm a nurse representative for BAPM. So as John said, I'll quickly go through some slides on how to write an abstract. So yeah, great. It's great you're all here, and obviously we're hoping that you're here because you're going to be submitting something to our conference later this year. And that's a great way of getting your work out, and so everyone can see what you're doing and networking with other people. And there's lots of ways that you can maximize your chances of being successful at abstract submission. And the guide that we're going to go through at the minute just looks at the expectation from BAPM annual conference and the scientific meeting abstract submission criteria as an example. But we appreciate that it might be you applying to other conferences as well. So just be mindful that if you are applying to other conferences, you might need to take into consideration some of the rules and the instructions they have in place. If you don't follow the rules, then obviously there's a risk that your abstract might be deemed ineligible. As John mentioned later on, we'll look through some examples of abstracts which will help with just backing up some of the knowledge we've discussed today. Some general tips. So abstracts, they're a really important part of reports and research papers. When you're putting in your abstract for whatever you've written or researched, less is more. They're often limited at a smaller number of words. BAPM stick to a word count of 300 words. It's useful to write out what you're expecting within your draft. So write it out in a longer form, and then we can start to condense those words down until you get to the right word count, and you've got exactly what you want to say within that word count. Bullet points and short sentences are really helpful to sort of get in snappier points when you're trying to condense your words as well. So making it easier for reviewers to read, make sure you're using the correct font, a really easy to use readable font, make sure it's a good size, and proofread before you send it in as well. If you've got peers that are happy to check over your work, then that's great as well. So it's just another set of eyes to look over what you've written to make sure that it makes sense from a grammar and a results point of view. And stuff to leave out, don't use any generic names, no patient identifiable data, and no endorsing of products of any description within your abstract, please. So writing your abstract, so for a start, everything starts with a title. So your title should reflect the topic and the message of your study. Make sure it's short and snappy to grab people's attention, and we're looking at sort of 10 to 15 words or less. Then once you've got your title, you can move on to your background or your introduction. So within your introduction, your background, you need to be including what is known about your subject. Have you done a literature search before you've taken on this topic? And is the information that you're presenting useful and interesting to others? Obviously, if the more useful it is and interesting to others, then the more interest we'll get for other people when you're providing your results, because people can probably use the data that you've presented and take it on themselves to either sort of apply policy improvement within their own units or work on what you've done to do further research studies. Thinking about quality improvement rather than just audit, you need to include your QI methodology and consider whether you can include a demonstration that you've got a sustained change from your quality improvement project. If you're reporting an audit of local practice, what learning points have you got from that, from your audit? You need to include that you've gained something from what you've done, and we need to see some results. With regard to a case report, what makes your case report interesting? If you've got an uncommon complication or a relatively common condition that might have greater interest than just describing a rare condition that you've come across. So I think it's just being mindful and pitching it to your audience. You know, like I say, you need to get the people's buy-in to read into and have an interest in what you're doing if they can feel like it's applicable to them within their units. And a background should be brief and relevant to the rest of the abstract, with a maximum of 1 to 2 references, although references are not strictly necessary. So initially starting off with your aim, so it must be SMART, so it needs to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time limited. So you need to be stating within your aim what exactly is your research audit question. This question, you need to make sure it's clearly defined, and then you need to make sure that what you're presenting then within the rest of your abstract and your results paper actually answers that question. If you've asked a question and you've not answered it, then the question's not relevant. So you just need to be asking yourself that as you're doing it, you do the two match up. Your study needs to be addressing the question. So then if we move on to protocol and methods, what did you actually do? You must be defined clearly which patients you investigated and how you did this. The method section should be clear enough that others can replicate your study if they want to do further studies on what you've done. What type of study was it? Was it a retrospective or a prospective case control, etc.? How did you find your data, and how did you select how many subjects to study? So the results section, this would be probably the meat of your abstract that you've been submitted. If you don't submit any results, then your abstract won't be considered at all. So you need to make sure you get some results in. So looking at the numbers and data are key to any scientific project or audit. You need to consider carefully how much data you present. We suggest only those data which are strictly relevant. You need to think about how you present the data and make sure it's in a readable format for who you're presenting it to. A common mistake is to use mean values when data is skewed. So again, just make sure that it's relevant and we can easily read the data. It needs to be understandable. The reader must be able to understand the data that you're presenting, so make sure it's clear and concise. Repeatable, you must give enough information that your study or audit is potentially repeatable by other researchers or anyone that's got an interest in what you've done. And t-tests and other stats. Good statistics are generally very simple. Think particularly about whether your data are normally distributed and what the statistics will tell the reader. So gestation, birth weight and APGAR scores are almost always non-parametric. Don't overanalyze, and remember that if you don't understand your statistics, the reader certainly won't. So if you need some help with stats, then again, it's addressing the people within your trust that support with that. You quite often have people that can support you with the data, or peers that can look at it, analyze it, and explain it to you in a clearer format to help you then address that and write it up in a clearer format. So it needs to be unique. Which part of your results are new? This should be the focus of your results section, commonly the last bit to presented. And representative. You should present enough data that the reader can decide if the results are relevant to their own patients. And English. This is important and commonly underestimated. Good grammar with no typographical errors, making it much easier for reading, is likely to sway the markers towards being more generous. Data are always plural. Get someone to proofread it for you. Your message and your conclusion. So thinking about what the reader will learn from your abstract, be short and punchy. The message from your abstract should be able to be presented in 1 sentence, and only include in the conclusion what you can conclude from your data, and do not repeat information given in the introduction. So like I said, you've got limited words to play with, so just make sure that you're not repeating yourself throughout it, and you're summing up what you've learned. And that was that quick sharing of presentation.
Very good, thank you, Natalie. So then if we look at the examples of high scoring conference abstracts from last year, these are also available on the BAPM website as a resource, so you can look at these in more detail if you want to. And it's quite good to use previous abstracts to give you a bit of a format and the way to write things. So the first one is this one: differences between necrotizing enterocolitis and focal intestinal perforation in a cohort of preterm infants. So you can see that's a short, snappy, precise title that tells you what you're going to learn or get from the abstract. They start with a nice background that's well summarized, isn't overly long, and they're also putting abbreviations in when they're using longer words. So you can see that they've put NEC in for necrotizing enterocolitis and FIP for focal intestinal perforation. And that's quite handy because you have a limited number of words and you can then use them again later on. And that saves on your word count. Your 300 words is really quite tight, so that's a useful thing to do. Their methods are also quite well structured and brief, but clear, and they're telling us exactly what they did and how they went about their study. They're telling us which statistical test they're using as well, and it's likely that someone could do something very similar by repeating the methodology. Their results, they actually give us data, so that's really important. Quite a few abstracts don't give data, and that's really not what we're looking for. We're looking for some real learning, some data to support the abstract conclusions and findings. So if you put data in, then that's really helpful. You can see that they've got some statistical tests as well, so there's some p-values going on there, and there's some real genuine learning that we can see within the abstract about NEC and mortality and other things as well. They finish with a nice conclusion, so it's a brief conclusion which highlights the key message or messages rather from this study, and they're not claiming anything additional that you can't see from their data, so they're summarizing what they've learned and making it clear to us without trying to express more than they can really draw from their study. Here's another one, outcome of implementing an intraventricular hemorrhage care bundle in a tertiary neonatal unit, a quality improvement project. So this is similar, brief and clear title, a good background. It's explaining why we need to do this, well, why they needed to do this study and what the benefits are. They talk about the improvement measure. Obviously, a quality improvement project is slightly different, so it's sensible to put in detail of the improvement measure in there. They've got a brief sentence about their aim as well, and that's good. And again, they're using an abbreviation, so overall and severe IVH is their abbreviation, and they've introduced that early on. These are their methods, again, fairly brief, and you can see what they did. They're also giving some data in their results in the primary outcomes section. And again, they've got a nice clear conclusion, which again helps you take away the key messages. This one's slightly different in that they haven't got gaps between the sections. I personally prefer gaps, but I guess that's personal preference, but they're easier to read if you space them out a little bit if you have got room. The other thing this abstract did was provide some data in the form of this figure. So we've got a graph showing the rates of IVH over the 3 epochs, and that's really quite helpful. And they also showed us what their medical and nursing care bundles were for this quality improvement project. And that highlights the fact that you can use the upload sections and abstracts, both in BAPM but also for other conferences, to provide other relevant and important information. And quite often you're not so limited with the size in the upload section. So it's worth exploring that and whether you can provide graphs or figures that can summarize things and give more information. This is a case report. So as we've said earlier, it's important to highlight why this case report is important, what makes it something that people might like to know about. Is it relevant to everyone, and so forth. So they've done a good job of that. They've explained quite a lot more technical detail about the condition, atrial flutter, gone through the details of the case so that we can read and understand what happened and why. And then they've got also a nice simple conclusion that makes it clear what the learning from this case is. They also provided an image of the ECG, so we can see the atrial flutter and the fact that it doesn't respond to adenosine. I think this is the last abstract. This is a service development project this time. So we can see that they've got, again, a clear title that's not too long. They've got a good background explaining why it's important, and then clear aims and methods. They've used bullet points, which may help people to see more easily exactly what's going on in the abstract. So that's something to think about as well. They've got clear results, so we've got some data and we can learn from the abstract without even seeing their presentation or poster. We can learn and take some information away from this. And then their conclusion again is good, it's easy to understand, and it summarizes exactly what they're learning from there. study is. So that's us. So we've finished our presentations. So we're now going to open it to question and answer session. So there's two ways that people can ask questions. You can either put a question in the chat and we'll respond to those, but you can also raise your hand and we'd be very happy for you to open up your microphone and your camera and ask your question directly if you'd like to. So Helen Robinson, is there any guidance around rough proportions of each section, i.e. more in the results section? I wouldn't say there was really, to be honest. The main thing is that you've got enough information in each section, so they probably need to be fairly equal and similar. But as we've said, don't overblow your conclusion. Just summarize what is actually learned and you can see from your data. So I think the one message would be not to put too much in the conclusion and not to try to make more of your study than there really is. It needs to be very much reflective on what you've learned from your data. Thank you, Helen. Mabel has asked, is it important to have complex statistical analysis? The answer is no. I think it's important to provide good quality data and information for us. And then the analysis needs to be appropriate and sensible. Obviously, if it's not appropriate, then people might spot that and that would be a concern. So it needs to be appropriate and sensible and add value to it. So I don't think you need to go complex at all, but some basic statistical analysis that's relevant and sensible is a good idea. Katrina's asked about if you're presenting a case study, is it okay to not have a results section? The answer to that is yes, you can use different titles to your sections if you want. Obviously, you're more describing what happened to the case. So I think that example that I showed used case study. So that's fine. You don't need to have a results section or follow the very, very typical approach. So yeah, please feel free to adapt it. Clearly for different abstract submission processes, so other conferences might have more defined and strict criteria, but speaking from the BAPM one, I don't think you need to follow very closely a strict criteria of sections. Is it generally acceptable to use numerics instead of words in the prose to save on word count, or is that considered bad form? It's definitely acceptable to use numerics, and I think we like to see data and numbers in there that we can interpret as well. So I would encourage you to use numerics personally. And as you say, it does save some of the word count, which is quite helpful when you've only got 300 words. Again, remember you can use figures or tables that you can add as uploads separately. So that's something worth thinking about as well. It's another way of spreading your information and expanding your word count. Helen Robinson has asked, what profession are those that review abstracts for the conference? Are any AHPs involved trying to get more AHPs submitting abstract? The answer to that is we have quite a broad panel. I don't know if Marcus wants to come in and respond on that, but we have a broad panel of people, and by no means is it just doctors at all. There's a very much a broad church of people that go through the abstracts and review them and score them for us. Marcus, did you want to talk about that?
Well, yes, certainly. We put a shout out to the membership recently, asking people if they wanted to assist us with the marking of abstracts. And yeah, I mean, I kind of haven't got the breakdown in front of me, but yeah, certainly it's we're getting a lot more AHP members. And I would imagine there's at least 2 or 3 that have put their hands up to help with the marking. So yeah, it's not just consultants marking these; it's a cross section, I would guess, of the membership as a whole.
So Kate's put a comment in the chat. So the BAPM categories for abstracts are research, quality improvement, case studies, and improving family or staff experience. Would you expect the abstracts to have different content for each of these? The answer is yes. So as we've said, you know, research studies take a more typical approach to the sections that they have in them, but we would expect different ones. And you could see that from the examples that I used. We expect different approaches and how the information is imparted to us. So yeah, there'd definitely be different content given for it, different ones. And Sarah Clark has mentioned a couple of times about supporting marking and so on, and as an AHP, and that there is a multi-professional approach to marking, as both Marcus and I have said already. Yeah. So that's helpful, thanks. So we've got some more thank yous. We've also got a comment from Sarah Clark in the chat that the BAPM conference is a great opportunity to submit your work for the first time. There are multiple sections and the guidance is easy to follow, so please do consider submitting your work. So well said, Sarah. I think we can probably wrap up now. It hasn't taken anywhere near as long as I thought it was going to, but I hope that's been useful and give people a bit more of a flavour about abstract writing. And we look forward to receiving your abstracts and also award nominations as well. So thank you very much for your time.